On this episode, we'll be playing excerpts of an interview that Jonathan and I did with my ex wife, Bernadette, uh, talking about the day that I was arrested, September 17th, 1986. Uh, Over a half a dozen agents surrounded me at my parking spot at the courthouse, shut down the DA's office, and searched the DA's office all day. At the same time, over a dozen FBI and DPS agents converged on my wife and my little 4-year-old son, took them back to the house and searched our home. And what you'll be hearing is Bernie talking about some of that. This interview was done just maybe a week after Bernie and I found out that Greg had died. He was working on a job in Mexico and had some time off, and he died in Mexico. And so that's what I'm talking about the sadness. And so thank you, Bernie. And we will be using more of her quotes and more of her statements as we go along. And hopefully next month we'll get her actually into the studio for a live interview. This is the Vic Feazell Show podcast, hosted by Vic Feazell and Jonathan Zimick. Sponsored by Moroso Wood-Fired Pizzeria and Pinewood Coffee Roasters. Thank you for doing this. And I know you're in as much pain as I am right now, if not more. And I appreciate you doing this. Let's talk first about the day that I was arrested.
We got up the morning of September the 17th, and Greg was refusing to go to school because my mother was coming. And you and I had woke up earlier, and we didn't feel well, you and I. You felt something was wrong, and so did I, but we didn't want to show it to Greg. And we had been frightened, so frightened before, that we didn't know if we were just feeling something real or just another day of being frightened they were going to do something to you.
I remember that. I remember I told you, I think maybe I should wear something today that will go good with chrome. Talking about the handcuffs.
Well, let me just say that, and I would always say, well, there's always the red tie, which was a famous red tie now. So I got Greg up, and we went to, I don't remember the name of the restaurant now. What was it? And when we pulled out this ugly
was it the kettle?
Car,
Was it the kettle?
He wanted to go to the kettle for pancakes. And so as we drove out, a K car followed us. And I immediately recognized Greg Rampton, and I recognized the K car because back then they had just the ugliest cars you've ever seen. No one else drove a K car in Waco, Texas, but FBI people, and we were used to them. So we drove to the kettle, and we went in. We sat down. Everybody was there. All of our friends were happy to see us. And, hey, Greg. And his favorite waitress was Evelyn. And she said, do you want your usual? And see, he had just turned 4 a week before that. Okay? He had just turned 4. And he said, yes, I want my pancakes. So everybody was paying attention to him. And at the same time the pancakes came out, Greg Rampton and a female FBI agent walked up, and they moved their jackets so that I could see their guns. And my heart began to pound and pound, and I could barely speak. And they said, you have to come with us. And Greg got angry because he wanted his pancakes. And he didn't know who these people were. But he saw their guns, and he was scared. And so they walked us out, and I said, I can't leave here without paying. And they said, oh, yes, you can. And then some of my friends stood up, and they were angry. And they were like looking at the agents, and the agents gave them looks back. And so we left without paying, which bothered me, and Greg was not happy. And they made us sit in one spot, which was very difficult because Greg was only 4, and he wanted to watch TV. And when I turned on the TV, they showed you being arrested, and they showed them push you kind of around from the car with Floyd Hacker and that lovely Ron Boyder and Bob Zane. And he said, that's Daddy. So I turned the station, and you were on the other station being arrested, and I didn't know what to do because I couldn't just sit there with him and not watch TV, but there was nothing on but you being handcuffed. And anytime he would get up to go do something, they would be ugly to him and make him go sit by his mother. Then the doorbell rang, and it was my mother. And she said, Bernadette, what is this? I said, Mama, it's the FBI. She said,
Yeah,
FBI?
your mom was Czech.
Yes, my mother was Czech. She sure was. And she talked like this, and she called you Wick.
Yeah.
And she said, what is this? She said, I've been driving around for an hour. I thought you were having a party. She thought I was having some kind of, women's coffee, and she didn't want to disturb it. She didn't know that indeed what had happened was that the FBI had just taken over the entire house. They were everywhere, okay? And so they made her sit in one spot with us, okay? And they listened to us, and they watched us. And so she was very cunning, even though she was a sweet, simple woman. She said, Bernadette, so te želáš Ježišmaria, so te želáš SS, which means Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, who are these people and what are they doing? And so when Mother would speak Czech to me, it disturbed them. And I think they probably were trying to find some Czech translator because they thought my mother and I were speaking in code. And so then Mother just took her rosary out and was Swata Madia Matko Bože Prezonat. She just sat there and did the rosary in Czech, and that's all we could do because they were in everything, and they had a metal detector in the backyard. It kept going bing bing, and we were on a landfill, so of course it kept pinging, and they kept digging stuff up. Well, they were digging up my bulbs and my flowers because I had flowers.
You had the most beautiful garden. I remember that. Huge lilies of every kind.
Yeah, and so they kept just digging up my plants and stuff, and what happened was they were getting angry and angrier and angrier because they kept tearing stuff up and digging stuff up and getting into the drawers and getting into your closet. They were highly interested in your closet because you had some guns.
Yeah.
And they took those. And they got angrier and angrier and began throwing more and more things because they were there for, 4 hours. Oh, my God. And they became mad because they couldn't find anything.
They, as I recall, you might want to tell about them unwrapping everything we had in the freezer and emptying our cereal boxes. Tell about that.
Oh, yeah. They would just go over and they just got a handful of cereal boxes and just dumped them out and looked at me, and they said stupid stuff to me. They said, do you have a washer and dryer? I said, yeah. And they said, how did you pay for that? And I said, revolving charge, you know, I mean, and they were angry because they could find nothing. And then they took you had a syringe from David Spence on it was on a plaque. And when they found that, they all rushed into the other room, and they took it, and they said, you have narcotics paraphernalia.
The plaque that was the plaque that was given to me by the sheriff's department down in I think in College Station. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we tried Dave in Cleburne.
This is Jonathan, and just a heads up, if you actually go to vicfeazell.com, we actually have a picture up there now of the plaque with the syringe missing, and you can actually see how faded it is from the sun as to where the needle used to be on the plaque. Go check it out.
And then they found a syringe with no needle in Greg's toy box, and they loved that because that too was drug paraphernalia, okay, that we had gotten from the vet, you know, and it was no needle, but they got that. He wanted to be a vet because he remembered when they were taking care of Spanky, you know, the dog. The dog had to have an injection, and he liked that. He liked the vet, you know, and so he was never he really the thing that was so bad was that when they took us out of the restaurant, he got mad at the FBI because he had a car seat in the front, and he wanted to be in the front seat because that's where he sat. And they said, no, you're not sitting in the front. And they made I think her name was Maureen O'Sullivan or something. She was the female agent, and they said, no, you're sitting in the back. And he said, no, I'm sitting with my mother. And they kind of had a fight with my 4-year-old about where he was going to sit, and he began to cry. He said, no, I sit with my mother. I want to be with my mother. I don't want to be with you. And so they made him sit in the back with an FBI agent. I think it was Greg Rampton. And that was just really bad because he just cried and was kind of beside himself all the way home, you know. It was, and I didn't know what to say to him at all.
And we had been going through the threats of me being arrested since about March of 1985. So it had been going on for over a year.
They also went crazy because you know, my family was old Czechoslovakian people. I think they probably had dollar bills sewn up in mattresses, and they found 4 $100 bills, all crisp, on your desk, and those had been money that my uncle and some of my other relatives had given to Greg for his birthday. In fact, one of them was still in a card, and they took that money as evidence of bribery.
I remember we had to bring Uncle Joe down from Fort Worth. He was in his 90s to testify that he gave that money to Greg for his birthday the week before. They wouldn't accept an affidavit. They said, no, that old man has to come get on the stand. We will not allow an affidavit.
Do you remember? Do you remember he walked in and he always had on a hat that was always too small for his head?
Yeah.
And he came walking in. He was mad, and he talked like this too. And they said, "Oh, you can't come in here because you don't have a tie on." And he looked, and the judge said, "Oh, just let him come in." Remember, he got up there and he did it without a tie.
I remember.
And after his testimony, the prosecutor, Jack Frails, was so angry. He said, "Well, Uncle Joe just won this trial for him."
Yeah.
They said, "Do you know Greg Feazell?" "Well, yes, I know Greg Feazell. He's my nephew. I know him his whole life." "Did you give him money for his?" "I always give him money for his birthday." "Did you give him a check or cash?" "I don't know no check. I give him cash." "Is this the cash?" "Yes, that's the cash. I always give him cash." And he was mad. It was so funny because I've never seen Uncle Joe mad.
No, he was such a sweet old man. He was a retired baker.
Yeah, yeah.
And
He
very,
was a
very
retired baker.
popular at the Fort Worth Zoo.
Yeah, and he did our wedding cake.
Yes, he did.
And he did. And when he left, everybody said, "Well, that's the end of that. Uncle Joe done won this trial for him." Do you remember?
I do.
He had on some kind of stripe, some kind of plaid pants, and some kind of other plaid shirt. You know, he never spent money on anything. And he'd say, "Uncle Joe, get a hearing aid." He'd say, "Oh no, I don't need no hearing aid. I'm going to die soon." That's how they work. And he was I think, their last witness. Wasn't he the last witness?
Well, he's the last one they cross-examined. We called Uncle Joe in the defense to prove where that money had come from because they had introduced it into evidence. Look at these crisp $100 bills we took out of his house. And so we had to get each one of your relatives to come testify. But Uncle Joe had to come the farthest, and he was in his 90s.
Yeah,
he was all bent over. He could barely walk. But he climbed on that witness stand, and he was a hero. Tell us more about Greg's reaction to all of this.
It was very hard to ever get him to get past that because seeing you handcuffed on television that day really did do a lot of damage to him.
And those men treated him mean, taking him out of the restaurant, and they treated you mean. They didn't have to do that. I remember Gary Richardson saying, I was a U.S. attorney, and I've never seen this happen before. If we indicted a public official, we would call his lawyer or we would call him and say, turn yourself in, because we knew they would, and if they didn't, we could find them, but they always did. He said it was an excessive abuse of power that he had never seen before in his life.
Well,
Yeah.
they had actually, Greg Rampton was sitting outside of our house waiting for me to leave because he just pulled in behind me and he let me go to the kettle. He sat out there and let me have enough time to order and to get pancakes, and then he came in and took us out. So they had it planned, and they had it planned for maximum embarrassment, and it worked quite well because you were on CNN every 18 minutes for 3 days.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
In Bernie's spare time, she actually hosts a blog, and that is called I'm Mad Too, Harry. And you can find that just through a simple Google or Yahoo search.
Thank you for listening to the Vic Feazell Show podcast. We're a primary source podcast. We talk about people we've known, things we've experienced. We're a primary source podcast. For more information, visit vicfeazell.com. Leave us a comment or a review. Subscribe to our YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook pages. And thank you for listening. Share us with your friends.
This is Texas singer-songwriter Brian Burns, and I've been to Waco, Hico, Hondo, Navasota, Winsboro, Jacksboro, Hillsboro, Santa Rosa, Austin, Houston, Galveston, Texarkana, Frisco, Buffalo, Conroe, Corsicana, and that's just in the last week. Keep a safe pace, folks. Relax and drive laid back, because Texas is a laid-back place. And if you've been in a car wreck, call Vic Feazell at 877-WITH-VIC.
With principal offices in Waco and Austin, Texas.